Have you ever tried to explain something obvious to someone and realized in the middle of the conversation that it didn't matter what you said? Not because the person was cruel, not because they wanted to hurt you, but because somehow they simply couldn't or didn't want to process what you were saying. The words went in, but they didn't land. The facts were presented, but they ricocheted off. And the more you tried, the greater the distance became. It wasn't anger. It was something worse. It was the feeling of talking to someone who was no longer there. A few years ago, in a tense conversation during a family dinner, a woman tried to explain to her brother why a certain economic policy was hurting small businesses. She had data, concrete examples, stories of people she knew. Her brother listened, but he didn't hear. With each argument, he repeated the same slogan. With each piece of evidence, he deflected to another slogan. In the end, he smiled and said, "You think too much. It's not that complicated." She realized at that moment that she was not dealing with disagreement. She was dealing with something that could not be crossed, an invisible barrier, a refusal that was not conscious but absolute. This feeling of helplessness in the face of irrationality, of exhaustion in the face of impermeability, is not new, and it's not personal. In 1943, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a German Lutheran pastor imprisoned for resisting the Nazi regime, wrote a letter from inside the prison. He had spent years trying to awaken the conscience of his compatriots. He had argued, preached, explained. He had shown evidence of the brutality that was spreading, but nothing worked. People did not change their minds, not because they were all evil, but because they had stopped thinking. And it was there, surrounded by bars and silence, that Bonhoeffer realized something that would change his understanding of the nature of evil. He realized that the real enemy was not evil. It was stupidity, not a lack of intelligence, not intellectual incapacity, but something much more dangerous. The voluntary surrender of the ability to think, the choice not to question, the conformity that shuts down critical consciousness and turns ordinary people into cogs in destructive systems. Bonhoeffer wrote, "Stupidity is a greater threat than evil." And he wasn't talking about dumb people. He was talking about intelligent people who had given up using their intelligence. He was talking about philosophers who had become propagandists, about citizens who had become slogan repeaters, of individuals who, instead of thinking, merely echoed what they were told. And most disturbing, he realized that evil could be fought. It could be exposed, confronted, defeated. But stupidity? Stupidity was impervious. It didn't listen. It didn't learn. It didn't change. It was a fortress without doors. Today, when we look at the world around us, political discussions that go nowhere, debates that turn into tribal wars, people who repeat opinions without knowing where they came from, Bonhoeffer's observation sounds prophetic. We live in an age where information is everywhere, but understanding is lacking, where everyone has access to facts but few seem capable of processing them, where arguing has become a waste of time, because on the other side there is no dialogue, there is only repetition. And the question Bonhoeffer asked 80 years ago remains urgent. Why do intelligent people act stupidly? What turns thinking individuals into automatic followers? And more importantly, how does this happen without them noticing? The answer is not in genetics. It is not in formal education. It is in something much more subtle and much more frightening. It is in the way entire societies can teach people to stop thinking and make them feel that they are thinking better than ever. Bonhoeffer saw this happen in Germany, but the mechanism he described is not unique to Nazism. It is a human pattern, and it is operating now all around you, perhaps even within you, because stupidity, as he discovered, is not an intellectual defect. It is a moral failure, and no one is immune. Bonhoeffer spent years observing how people around him changed, not suddenly, not dramatically, but gradually, as if something inside them was being turned off. He saw colleagues, friends, intellectuals, people who had previously questioned, debated, and thought, begin to repeat ready-made phrases, begin to avoid difficult conversations, begin to accept simplified explanations for complex realities. And most disturbing, they didn't realize it. They continued to consider themselves rational, informed people on the right side of history, but they had stopped thinking. This is what led Bonhoeffer to make a fundamental distinction. He realized that evil, however terrible it may be, has a structural weakness. Evil knows it is evil. Even the worst of human beings carries within them some recognition, some unease, some internal fissure. The murderer knows he has killed. The torturer knows he has tortured. They can justify it, they can rationalize it, but somewhere deep down they know. And that awareness, even if buried, even if denied, is a vulnerability. It is the point where guilt can enter, where shame can corrode, where evil can eventually turn against itself. That is why, throughout history, systems based on evil always carry the seeds of their own destruction. Dictators live in fear. Criminals live in paranoia. Evil generates consequences that sooner or later come back around. It may take time. It may cost lives. But there is something about evil that can be confronted, exposed, fought. There is an internal logic that can be dismantled. There is a conscience, even if distorted, that can be reached. But stupidity? Stupidity does not have this vulnerability. Stupidity does not recognize itself. It feels no guilt. It carries no doubt. It operates with unshakable confidence, an impervious certainty. When you try to argue with a stupid person, you are not dealing with someone who has chosen evil and knows it. You are dealing with someone who genuinely believes they are right. Someone who not only rejects your arguments, but doesn't even process them as arguments. For the stupid person, inconvenient facts are not facts. They are attacks. Logic that contradicts their worldview is not logic. It is manipulation. Contrary evidence is not evidence. It is fake news, conspiracy, lies from the system. And that is precisely why stupidity is unbeatable in the field of rational dialogue. You cannot win a debate with someone who does not recognize the rules of debate. You cannot present evidence to someone who does not accept the existence of evidence. You cannot appeal to reason when reason itself has been turned off. Martin Luther King Jr. realized this too. He said, "Nothing in the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscious stupidity." Notice the words. Sincere ignorance, that is someone who really doesn't know but believes they do. And conscious stupidity, someone who has access to information but chooses not to process it. Both cases are impervious, both are dangerous, and both are harder to combat than calculated evil, because evil at its core is fragile. It needs strength, threats, and violence to sustain itself, but stupidity sustains itself. It doesn't need weapons. It doesn't need coercion. It feeds on certainty, and certainty needs nothing but itself. Think about how many times you have tried to change someone's opinion about something important. You presented facts. The person ignored them. You showed data. The person changed the subject. You brought in experts. The person disqualified the experts. In the end, you realized you weren't having a dialogue. You were hitting a wall, and the wall didn't move because it didn't even know it was being hit. This is what Bonhoeffer called impermeability. Stupidity is not just the absence of intelligence. It is the presence of a cognitive barrier that prevents any external information from entering. It is the construction of a mental fortress where everything inside is true and everything outside is false. And once someone enters that fortress, there is no door, there is no window, there is no way out through logic. Mark Twain summed it up brutally. Never argue with stupid people. They will drag you down to their level and beat you by experience. He wasn't saying that stupid people are dumb. He was saying that they operate on their own set of rules, where logic doesn't work, where consistency doesn't matter, where winning means just repeating the same thing louder and with more conviction. And the scariest thing, they always walk away from the argument feeling like they've won. Because stupidity doesn't need external validation. It validates itself internally. No matter how many times the facts contradict it, no matter how many times reality proves otherwise, the stupid person always finds a way to rearrange the narrative so that they remain the hero, the victim, the enlightened person surrounded by blind people. Bonhoeffer saw this firsthand. He saw people who were once capable of critical thinking become incapable of hearing anything that challenged the official narrative. He saw intellectuals, professors, lawyers, people who should have been guardians of reason, repeating propaganda as if it were philosophy. And what's most disturbing, they believed it. They weren't pretending. They weren't being cynical. They had genuinely convinced themselves that they were thinking, when in fact they were merely echoing. And that's exactly where stupidity becomes a social threat, because it doesn't need evil leaders to spread. It spreads on its own, from person to person, like a cognitive virus. Once someone accepts a simplified narrative and stops questioning it, that person becomes a transmitter. They repeat it. They convince others. They contaminate. And you can't stop them with arguments, because arguments presuppose that the other person is willing to think. And stupid people aren't. They've already made up their minds. And nothing, absolutely nothing, will make them reconsider. But then the question arises that Bonhoeffer asked himself in that prison. If stupidity is so powerful, so resistant, so impervious, why does it exist? Why do intelligent people, capable of complex reasoning, suddenly turn off critical thinking? What makes someone choose to stop thinking? The answer lies in what happens when stupidity ceases to be an individual phenomenon and becomes a collective one. Bonhoeffer realized something that most people prefer not to see. No one is born stupid. Stupidity is not a genetic condition. It is not a biological flaw. It is a transformation. Something that happens when a person, for reasons they often do not even understand themselves, decides that thinking is too tiring, too dangerous, too lonely, and stops. And what triggers this transformation is almost never internal. It is social. He observed that stupidity flourishes in environments where conformity is rewarded and intellectual independence is punished. Not necessarily punished with physical violence. Sometimes a disapproving look is enough. Exclusion from the group. The subtle joke that puts you on the outside. The feeling that if you keep questioning, you'll be left alone. And most people can't stand being alone. Bonhoeffer described this as almost a sociological law. When a group forms around a narrative, an ideology, a collective identity, the pressure to conform is immense. Not because there is a tyrannical leader shouting orders, but because there is something much more subtle and much more effective, the desire to belong. And belonging comes at a price. The price is always the same. You stop thinking for yourself. Not all at once, not consciously, but little by little. You start avoiding certain questions. You start accepting certain explanations without questioning them. You start repeating certain phrases because everyone else does. And repeating them makes you feel part of something bigger. At first, you still feel a slight discomfort. An inner voice that says, wait, this doesn't make sense. But soon you learn to silence that voice because it distances you from the group. And the group is where you find security, validation, identity. So you trade. You trade intellectual clarity for social acceptance. You trade complexity for simplicity. You trade critical thinking for the tranquility of knowing exactly what to think. And suddenly you're no longer thinking, you're just following. Bonhoeffer saw this happen in Nazi Germany, a country that had produced Goethe, Kant, Beethoven, a country of poets, philosophers, scientists. And in less than a decade, it became a country of followers. Not because all Germans were stupid, but because all Germans learned to stop questioning. And the most disturbing thing, many of them were intelligent people. Bonhoeffer cites the case of Martin Heidegger, one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century. Heidegger wrote about being, existence, authenticity. He questioned the fundamental structures of reality. And yet when Nazism came to power, Heidegger joined the party. He became rector of a university under Nazi control. He gave speeches defending the regime. And never, until the day he died in 1976, did he publicly repent. Was Heidegger dumb? No. Was he stupid? According to Bonhoeffer, yes. Because intelligence and stupidity are not opposites. You can be brilliant in abstract thought and completely blind in moral discernment. You can be able to dissect the structure of time and unable to see the barbarism around you. Because stupidity is not an intellectual failure. It is a failure of courage. The courage to think for yourself. The courage to question what everyone else accepts. The courage to give up the security of belonging in the name of integrity. And that courage is rare, much rarer than intelligence. Bonhoeffer realized that most people who became stupid under Nazism were not evil. They didn't wake up in the morning thinking, today I'm going to contribute to evil. They just stopped thinking. They accepted the official narrative because it was easier. They repeated the slogans because everyone else was repeating them. They turned their faces away from what was happening because looking was uncomfortable. And when Bonhoeffer tried to talk to these people, to present evidence, to argue, he realized he wasn't talking to individuals. He was talking to echoes. They didn't respond with their own thoughts. They responded with phrases they had heard. They didn't analyze. They repeated. They didn't process. They regurgitated. George Orwell described this phenomenon exactly in 1984. In the novel, Big Brother not only controls people's actions, he controls their ability to think. Newspeak, the official language of the regime, is designed to limit thought. If you don't have words to express an idea, you can't think the idea. If you can't think the idea, you can't question it. And that's exactly what happens when stupidity becomes collective. People stop having the vocabulary to doubt. They stop having the mental space for complexity. Everything boils down to slogans. You're either on the right side or the wrong side. Whoever is not with us is against us. Trust the plan. Simple, powerful, empty phrases. And the more they are repeated, the more they become the only way of thinking. Bonhoeffer realized that when you try to confront a person like this, you're not confronting the person. You are confronting the slogans that have taken hold of them. And slogans have no doubts. They have no nuance. They have no openness. They are ready-made, impervious, self-sufficient fortresses. And the scariest thing? This dynamic is not unique to totalitarian regimes. It happens in any group that demands total conformity. It happens in political movements, both left and right. It happens in religions, corporations, digital tribes, online communities. It happens whenever a group decides that there is only one correct way of thinking, and that any deviation from that way is treason. When this happens, people within the group stop thinking, and they start watching. They watch each other to make sure no one is questioning too much, because questioning is dangerous. Not for the group, for the individual identity of those who belong to the group. If you start to doubt the collective narrative, you start to doubt yourself. And that is unbearable. So it's easier not to doubt. It's easier to accept. It's easier to repeat. It's easier to be stupid. And Bonhoeffer realized that once someone makes that choice, even unconsciously, it's almost impossible to reverse it. Because the person isn't just defending an idea. They're defending their own identity. They're defending the belonging that cost them so much. They are defending the feeling of being on the right side, of being part of something important, of not being alone in the world. And when you attack the idea, the person feels that you are attacking them. So they don't listen. They close themselves off. They counterattack, not with arguments, with indignation, with slogans, with the unshakable conviction of someone who doesn't need to think because they already know. But if stupidity is a social phenomenon fueled by groups, movements, collective narratives, then the question that begs to be asked is, who benefits from it? Who wins when millions of people stop thinking? The answer is simple and disturbing. Bonhoeffer realized something that many try to ignore. Collective stupidity does not arise spontaneously. It needs specific conditions. And the most important condition is the presence of concentrated power. He wrote that this was almost a sociological law. Where there is an accumulation of power, there is a proliferation of stupidity. Not because power makes people stupid, but because power creates an environment where thinking becomes dangerous and not thinking becomes safe. And safety for most people is worth more than truth. When an authoritarian regime rises, stupidity spreads quickly, but not just through direct coercion, not just because people are afraid of being arrested or killed. Stupidity spreads because the regime offers something seductive, a simple narrative that explains everything, a clear enemy, an obvious solution, and the promise that if you just trust, everything will be fine. Thinking, on the other hand, is complicated. Thinking requires you to accept ambiguity, to tolerate contradictions, to live without definitive answers. And that is exhausting. It is lonely. It is unsettling. So when someone comes along and says, "Don't think, just follow. I know what to do," most people accept it, not because they are weak, but because they are human. And humans have a limit to how much internal chaos they can bear. Bonhoeffer saw this happen in Germany, but the dynamic he described is not limited to classic totalitarian regimes. It appears whenever there is a concentration of power, political, economic, cultural, social, that benefits from the non-reflection of the masses. Think about how propaganda works. Not just Nazi propaganda, any propaganda. The goal is never to convince through rational arguments. The goal is to repeat a simple message so many times that it becomes automatic, that it bypasses critical thinking and goes straight to the emotional, that it becomes part of one's identity before it is even questioned. Be part of the change. You're on the right side of history. Together we are stronger. Trust science. Defend freedom. Phrases that sound good, that activate something inside you. But if you really stop to analyze them, they don't say anything concrete. They are empty shells. And that is exactly why they work. Because they don't require thought. They only require repetition. And once a phrase like that becomes part of your automatic vocabulary, you stop questioning what it means. You just repeat it. And by repeating it, you feel part of something. Validated. Included. On the right side. Bonhoeffer realized that Nazi propaganda did not turn Germans into monsters. It turned Germans into repeaters. And repeaters don't need to understand, they just need to echo. But here's the most disturbing point. This mechanism did not disappear with the end of Nazism. It is operating now. In democracies, in social movements, in political debates, in digital tribes. We live in an age where there has never been so much access to information. And at the same time, there has never been such an inability to process information. Because information is not the problem. The problem is the excess of narratives competing for attention. And the way our brains deal with this is not by increasing our capacity for critical analysis. It is by choosing one narrative and turning off everything that contradicts it. Think about how social media works. You follow people who think like you. You receive content that confirms what you already believe. You are bombarded by headlines that reinforce your worldview. And whenever something comes up that challenges your beliefs, you have two options. Process the cognitive dissonance, which is painful, or simply dismiss it as a lie, manipulation, propaganda from the other side. And most people choose the second option, because it's easier, because it hurts less, because it preserves the feeling of being right. And so, without realizing it, you become part of a bubble. And inside that bubble, everything makes sense. Everyone agrees. Everyone repeats the same phrases. And anyone who disagrees is immediately identified as an enemy, as ignorant as part of the problem. Bonhoeffer would say that this is stupidity on an industrial scale, not because the people inside the bubbles are stupid, but because they have stopped thinking critically. They have stopped questioning their own narrative. They have stopped tolerating complexity. And who benefits from this? Who wins when millions of people divide themselves into tribes that do not dialogue but only wage war? Those in power. Always. Because a population divided into tribes that hate each other is a population that does not question who is really making decisions. A population obsessed with proving that the other side is wrong is a population that does not realize when it is being manipulated by both sides. A population that lives in a permanent state of cultural warfare is a population that does not have the energy to think about real power structures. And this is not a conspiracy. It's simply how power systems work. They don't need to silence dissenting voices if they can get dissenting voices to silence each other. They don't need to censor information if they can get people to choose to live in bubbles where only one version of information exists. They don't need to impose stupidity if they can create conditions where stupidity becomes voluntary. And that's exactly what's happening. Bonhoeffer realized that the greatest trick of collective stupidity is to make people believe that they are thinking freely, that they are informed, that they are on the right side of the truth, when in reality, they are just repeating what their group has decided is true. It doesn't matter which group. Left, right, center, religious, atheist, progressive, conservative, all groups have their narratives. They all have their slogans, they all have their unquestionable truths, and they all punish members who start to question too much. Because the purpose of a group is never truth. The purpose of a group is cohesion, and cohesion requires conformity. And conformity requires that you stop thinking independently and start thinking tribally. And once you're thinking tribally, you're no longer thinking. You're just defending territory. Bonhoeffer saw this in Nazi Germany, but he would also have seen it in any regime that prioritizes obedience over reflection. He would have seen it in revolutionary movements that began with noble ideals and ended in purges. He would have seen it in religions that replaced spirituality with dogma. He would have seen it in corporations that replaced ethics with profit. And he would certainly see it today. In a world where people are not forced to stop thinking, but choose to stop thinking because thinking is tiring, dangerous, and socially costly. But then the inevitable question arises. The question that Bonhoeffer knew each person would have to face alone. If stupidity is so widespread, if it is in all groups, in all narratives, in all tribes, if even intelligent people fall for it without realizing it, then how do you know you're not falling for it too? How do you know that your convictions are genuine and not just echoes of the group to which you belong? How do you know that you are thinking for yourself and not just repeating what you have learned to repeat? And more importantly, do you have the courage to consider the possibility that some of the things you are absolutely certain are true may not be? There is a scene that Bonhoeffer could have witnessed, but which happens every day, everywhere. A person is in a heated discussion. They are defending something with absolute conviction. They present arguments, cite sources, use logic. On the other side, someone disagrees, also with absolute conviction. Also with arguments, sources, logic, and neither of them changes their mind. Why? Because neither of them is really thinking. They are both just performing. Performing identity, performing belonging, performing the certainty that they are right and the other is wrong. But here's what no one wants to admit. Both may be operating out of stupidity, not because they are dumb, but because they have stopped questioning themselves. And the hardest thing Bonhoeffer asks us to do is to turn the mirror around. Not to point out stupidity in others, that's easy, but to recognize the possibility of stupidity in ourselves. That is almost unbearable, because if you start questioning your own convictions, you enter dangerous territory. You begin to realize that many of the things you believe so firmly, you never really thought about them. You just absorbed them. You just accepted them. You just repeated them. How many of your political opinions are genuinely yours? How many came from your family, your social bubble, the influences you follow, the friends you want to impress? How many of your moral beliefs have you really examined? How many did you simply inherit and never question? How many times have you avoided reading something, watching something, listening to something, not because it was false, but because it challenged what you wanted to believe? How many times have you dismissed an idea not because it was wrong, but because it came from someone on the other side? These questions are uncomfortable, and that's exactly why most people don't ask them. It's easier to believe that others are stupid, that you're on the right side, that your convictions are based on facts while others are based on emotion and ignorance. But Bonhoeffer would say, if you are absolutely certain that you are right, you are probably stupid, because absolute certainty is the clearest sign that you have stopped thinking. People who really think live with doubt. They live with ambiguity. They live knowing that they may be wrong. And that doubt is not weakness, it is lucidity. Friedrich Nietzsche called this the herd mentality. He realized that most people do not think for themselves. They just follow the herd. And worse, they believe they are thinking. They believe their opinions are their own, when in fact they are just echoes of the group to which they belong. And no one wants to admit that they are part of the herd. We all want to believe that we are independent, critical, free. But if you have never publicly disagreed with anything your group believes, you are not independent. You are the herd. If you have never changed your mind about anything important in recent years, you are not thinking. You are repeating. If you feel automatic anger when someone disagrees with you, you are not defending an idea. You are defending your identity. And identity does not accept questioning. Identity needs certainty. Identity needs enemies. Identity needs slogans. But thought accepts being wrong. Thought seeks complexity. Thought tolerates contradiction. And that is exactly why thinking is lonely. Because when you start questioning your group's narratives, the group starts questioning you. And most people can't handle that. They prefer the security of conformity to the loneliness of lucidity. Bonhoeffer knew this. He lived it. He questioned what everyone around him accepted. And he paid the price. He was arrested. He was executed. But he never stopped thinking. And he knew that most people don't have that courage. And he didn't judge them for it. But he also didn't lie about what it meant. If you choose the safety of conformity, you choose stupidity. It may be comfortable stupidity. It may be socially validated stupidity. But it's still stupidity. And perhaps the most important question you can ask yourself right now is, in what areas of my life have I stopped thinking? Where am I just repeating? Where am I operating on autopilot, defending positions I've never really examined? Because if there's one thing Bonhoeffer's observation teaches us, it's that no one is immune. Stupidity doesn't choose victims by IQ. It chooses by conformity. And all of us at some point in some area are conformists. The question is, do you have the courage to see where? If you feel that there is something deeply wrong with the way people have stopped talking to each other, how tribes have formed and critical thinking has disappeared, you are not alone. This channel exists to explore these invisible patterns that operate in society and within us. If this resonates, subscribe and turn on the bell, because each video is an attempt to keep lucidity alive in a world that rewards conformity. The good news, if there is any good news here, is that stupidity is not a permanent sentence. Bonhoeffer believed it could be reversed, not through instruction, not through arguments, but through liberation. And liberation begins with a choice, the choice to question, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's lonely, even when the group punishes you for it. Bonhoeffer knew that there is no instruction manual for combating stupidity, because stupidity is not a technical problem that can be solved with information. It is an existential problem that can only be solved with courage. The courage to think when everyone around you has stopped thinking. The courage to question when everyone around you accepts. The courage to tolerate uncertainty when everyone around you demands certainty. And that doesn't mean you have to become a permanent rebel, questioning everything all the time. It doesn't mean you have to disagree with everything your group believes just to prove your independence. That would just be another form of conformity. Conformity to the opposite. What Bonhoeffer proposes is something more subtle. He proposes that you develop the habit of observing your own thoughts, of noticing when you are repeating something without really believing it, of noticing when you are defending a position not because it is true, but because it keeps you included. He proposes that you become vigilant, not of others, of yourself. And that starts with simple questions. Questions you ask yourself internally, without having to announce them to anyone. Why do I believe this? If the answer is because everyone I respect believes it, you don't have a belief, you have an echo. Do I really understand this, or am I just repeating what I've heard? If you can't explain something in your own words, you don't understand it. You've memorized it. When was the last time I changed my mind about something important? If the answer is never, or I don't remember, you're not thinking. You're crystallized. Do I avoid information that contradicts what I believe? If so, you're not seeking truth. You're protecting your identity. Do I feel angry when someone disagrees with me? If so, you're not defending an idea. You're defending your ego. These questions don't have easy answers, and they shouldn't. The goal isn't to reach a comforting conclusion. The goal is to remain vigilant, self-critical, intellectually humble. And intellectual humility doesn't mean thinking you know nothing. It means knowing that you could be wrong, always, about anything, and being willing to change your mind if the evidence changes. But this comes at a cost that most people are not willing to pay. The cost is loneliness, because when you stop repeating the group's slogans, the group notices. When you start asking questions that no one else asks, the group gets uncomfortable. When you reject simplifications, the group sees you as too complicated, too problematic, untrustworthy. And you have to choose the approval of the group or intellectual integrity. Bonhoeffer chose integrity, and he was executed for it. I'm not saying you need to be a martyr, but I am saying that remaining thoughtful in an environment that rewards non-reflection always comes at a social price. And most people, when they realize this price, back down. They return to the safety of the herd. They go back to repeating. They go back to accepting, because it's easier, because it hurts less, because at least you're not alone. But Bonhoeffer would say, if you choose the safety of conformity, you choose stupidity. And stupidity, however comfortable it may be, is still stupidity. So what to do? First, accept complexity. The world is not black and white. There is no totally right side and totally wrong side. No group has a monopoly on the truth. Any narrative that offers you a simple explanation for a complex problem is lying, or manipulating, or both. If someone tells you that all your problems have a single cause, be suspicious. If a movement tells you that there is only one enemy, be suspicious. If an ideology promises you salvation if you just follow without question, run away. Second, always question, not cynically, not paranoidly, but sincerely. Ask, does this make sense? Or am I accepting it because it's convenient? Ask, do I really believe this, or am I repeating it to belong? And here's the most important thing. Don't just question what others say. Question what you say. Question your own certainties. Question your own narratives. Because if you only question others, you're not thinking. You're just rooting. Third, tolerate ambiguity. The truth is rarely clear. It's rarely definitive. It's rarely comfortable. If you need absolute certainty to function, you'll be easy prey for those who offer false certainties. Learn to live with, I don't know. Learn to say, that's complicated. Learn to accept that some questions don't have easy answers. And that's okay. Fourth, resist tribalism. You don't need an ideological tribe to exist. You don't need a group that thinks exactly like you to feel validated. You can have friends with different views. You can respect people who disagree with you. You can live without enemies. And if that makes you feel out of place, lonely without a place, welcome to the club of those who think. Bonhoeffer was in that club, and he knew it was a small club, but he also knew it was the only club worth being in. Because in the end, the choice is always the same: conformity or lucidity, belonging or integrity, safety or truth. And most people choose conformity. They choose belonging. They choose safety. And there is no judgment in that, just recognition. When you choose that, you choose to stop thinking. And when you stop thinking, you become part of the problem Bonhoeffer described. Not because you are bad, but because you have become stupid. The good news is that this choice is not permanent. You can, at any time, decide to start thinking again. Decide to question. Decide to tolerate uncertainty. Decide to be free. But you need to know, this freedom comes at a price. And the price is never again having the tranquility of those who are absolutely certain. Never again having the comfort of those who belong without questioning. Never again having the peace of those who don't need to think. But in return, you gain something rare. Something that most people will never have. You gain yourself. Bonhoeffer knew something that most people discover too late. Lucidity does not bring peace. It brings weight. When you stop accepting ready-made narratives, when you start questioning what everyone around you repeats without thinking, when you refuse to simplify what is complex, you don't become happier. You become more aware. And awareness, contrary to what self-help gurus promise, is not liberating. It is exhausting. Because now you see the patterns, you see the contradictions, you see how people deceive themselves. You see how entire groups operate under collective illusions. You see how narratives are constructed, disseminated, defended, not because they are true, but because they are useful for maintaining cohesion, identity, power. And you can no longer unsee. It's like those optical illusion drawings. Once you notice the second image hidden in the first, you can no longer look and see only the first. Your perception has changed, and there's no going back. Bonhoeffer lived this. He saw his compatriots, people he knew, people he loved, turn into automatons, repeating slogans, accepting atrocities, turning their faces away from the suffering around them. And he couldn't stop seeing it. He couldn't pretend that everything was fine. He couldn't turn off his mind and accept it. And that isolated him, because the people around him didn't want to be awakened. They didn't want their certainties questioned. They didn't want to face the possibility that they were wrong, that they were being manipulated, that they were contributing to something monstrous. They wanted to continue believing, continue belonging, continue feeling safe within their narratives. And when Bonhoeffer tried to show them what was happening, when he tried to make them see, they didn't thank him. They avoided him. They attacked him. They considered him problematic, radical, dangerous, because lucidity is contagious and dangerous and uncomfortable. And most people, when confronted with someone who is awake, don't think, I want to wake up too. They think, I want this person to stop bothering me. So they push them away, they silence them, they punish them. And those who remain lucid are left alone. Not completely alone, perhaps. There are others who have also seen, others who can no longer pretend, but they are rare. And finding them is difficult, because they don't advertise themselves, they don't form tribes, they don't create movements, because they know that any group eventually becomes just another bubble, just another narrative, another form of collective stupidity. So lucidity in truth is lonely, and it has another cost, a cost that no one warns you about. When you stop accepting simple answers, when you start to see nuance in everything, when you refuse to choose a side and declare war on the other, you lose the ability to have clear enemies. And clear enemies are comforting. They tell you who you are by opposition. They give you something to fight against. They simplify the world into us versus them. And that organizes experience. It gives purpose. It gives identity. It gives you the feeling that you're on the right side of something important. But when you see that both sides operate under stupidity, when you see that no group possesses the truth, when you see that everyone is on some level repeating narratives, defending territories, performing identities, you lose the clarity of the conflict. And without conflict, without an enemy, without a tribe, you also lose the feeling of belonging to something bigger. You are left with only yourself, with your doubts, with your contradictions, with the awareness that the world is much messier, much grayer, much more ambiguous than any narrative can capture. And that is lonely in a way that few can bear. Bonhoeffer endured it, but he paid the price. He was arrested. He was executed. He died knowing that most people around him would never wake up. They would never see what he saw. They would never question what he questioned. And yet, he chose lucidity, not because it was heroic, but because once you see, you can no longer unsee. And trying to force yourself back to sleep is worse than accepting the loneliness of being awake. But there is something Bonhoeffer knew, and that is perhaps the only thing that makes lucidity bearable. You are not doing this to save the world. You are doing this to save yourself. Not in a spiritual sense, not in the sense of redemption, but in the basic sense of integrity, of not betraying your own conscience, of not accepting to live a lie just because the lie is more comfortable. And there is something deeply dignified in that, something that doesn't need applause, something that doesn't need external validation, something that exists only between you and yourself. The refusal to surrender, not to evil. Evil is easy to identify and resist, but to stupidity, your own stupidity. The constant temptation to switch off, accept, repeat, belong. And this refusal does not need to be public. It does not need to be performative. It does not need to be announced. It happens in silence, in small daily choices, in the decision to question something that everyone accepts, in the decision to tolerate uncertainty when everyone demands certainty, in the decision not to choose a side when everyone demands that you choose. And these decisions are invisible. No one will applaud you for them. No one will consider you a hero. In fact, many will consider you confused, indecisive, weak. But you will know that you did not give up, that you did not disconnect, that you continued to think, even when it was easier to stop. And maybe that needs to be enough. Because in the end, lucidity does not promise you happiness. It does not promise you success. It does not promise you recognition. Lucidity promises you only one thing. You will not live a lie. You will not spend your life repeating what others have decided you should think. You will not die without ever having really thought for yourself. And for Bonhoeffer, that was worth everything. It was worth prison. It was worth loneliness. It was even worth death. Not because he was special, but because he understood something fundamental. A life without thought is not a life. It is merely an existence. And to exist without thinking is a form of dying while alive. So he chose to think, even knowing the cost, even knowing he would not change the world, even knowing he would die before seeing any victory. And the question that remains, the question each of us must answer for ourselves is, are you willing to pay the price? The price of seeing, the price of questioning, the price of not belonging, the price of carrying the awareness that the world is more complex, more ambiguous, more disturbing than most people are willing to admit. Because if you're not willing, there's no judgment. Most people aren't. And they live reasonable lives, functional lives. Lives in which the discomfort of awareness has been exchanged for the security of conformity. But if you are reading this and something inside you is troubled, if something inside you has seen too much to go back to sleep, if something inside you refuses to accept ready-made answers, then you already know what your choice is, and you will need to learn to live with it, with loneliness, with doubt, with the responsibility of keeping yourself thinking in a world that rewards those who stop thinking. Bonhoeffer made that choice, and he died for it, but he died whole. He died knowing that he had not betrayed himself, that he had not surrendered, that until the very last moment he remained who he was. And maybe that's what it's all about in the end. Not winning, not convincing, not changing the world, but not letting the world change you. In prison, shortly before his execution, Bonhoeffer wrote something that sums it all up. Stupidity is a more dangerous enemy of the good than malice. He did not write this in anger. He did not write it in despair. He wrote it with clarity. The clarity of someone who saw everything, understood everything, and accepted everything. He did not defeat collective stupidity. He did not manage to awaken Germany. He did not manage to prevent the horror, but he achieved something that is perhaps more important. He did not allow himself to be contaminated. He remained lucid until the end. He did not betray his thoughts. He did not betray his conscience. He did not betray himself. And that is no small thing, because in the end, you don't control the world. You don't control people. You don't control the systems of power, the collective narratives, the waves of stupidity that sweep across entire societies. But you control one thing, yourself. You choose whether to think or repeat, whether to question or accept, whether to tolerate complexity or demand simplicity, whether to belong at any cost or maintain integrity even when alone. And that choice is not made once. It is made every day, in every conversation, in every opinion, in every moment when you feel the temptation to turn off your mind and just follow what everyone around you is following. Bonhoeffer made that choice every day, and in the end it cost him his life. But he knew, and this is the most important lesson, that living without making that choice also has a cost. It costs something deeper than physical life. It costs the soul. It costs dignity. It costs humanity. Because when you stop thinking, you don't die, but you stop truly living. You become just a function, a repeater, a cog, and cogs have no life of their own. They just turn as the system demands. And perhaps Bonhoeffer's greatest insight is this: stupidity is not defeated, it is resisted. You will not cure society. You will not convince the masses. You will not dismantle systems of manipulation and conformity. They are too big, too powerful, too entrenched. But you can refuse to participate. You can refuse to repeat. You can refuse to switch off. And that refusal, however small it may seem, is everything. Because the only way to resist collective stupidity is to remain individually lucid. And the only way to remain lucid is to never stop questioning, never stop doubting, never stop thinking. And yes, it will isolate you. It will tire you. It will make you feel out of place, alone, sometimes hopeless. But it will also keep you human. It will keep you whole. It will keep you free. And freedom in the deepest sense is not doing what you want. It is not letting others decide what you should think. So in the end, Bonhoeffer's legacy is not a solution. It is an invitation to look around, to notice patterns, to recognize stupidity at work, in others, in systems, and perhaps even in yourself. And after that recognition, to make a choice that no one can make for you, a choice that no one will applaud, a choice that will cost you something, the choice to keep thinking, not because you will change the world, but because you will remain true to yourself. And in a world where millions choose to surrender, where millions choose to repeat, where millions choose the safety of stupidity, choosing lucidity, even alone, is an act of silent resistance. It is the refusal to be a cog in the wheel, the refusal to live asleep, the refusal to die without ever having truly lived. And perhaps that is what Bonhoeffer leaves us with, not a guarantee of victory, but the dignity of trying, the dignity of dying whole, the dignity of never having betrayed your own conscience. Because in the end, when you look back, the question will not be, did you win? The question will be, did you stay awake? And if the answer is yes, even if it cost you everything, you truly lived. You weren't just another voice in the choir, another repeater, another fool. You were you, thinking, questioning, free. And that, in the end, is everything. Now a question for you, a question that only you can answer in the silence of your own conscience. In what area of your life have you stopped questioning? Where are you just repeating, accepting, conforming, without really knowing why? You don't have to answer here. You don't have to answer to anyone. But you need to answer to yourself. Because if Bonhoeffer taught us anything, it's that stupidity begins the moment you stop asking difficult questions, and it ends the moment you decide to ask them again. Watch the next videos on the channel, count on me, and follow the White Rabbit.